Hey everyone, and welcome to Southern War, a podcast about the Southern theater of the American Revolution. I'm Ranger William from Over Mountain Victory National Historic Trail.
And I am Ranger Adrian from 96 National Historic Site.
Together, we will explore some of the well-known and not-so-known stories from the American Revolution here in the American South. Time to make the history. So on today's episode of Southern War, we are going to be talking with Ranger Adrian from 96 National Historic Site about some of the early history there of 96 and also a really great claim to fame. Adrian, what is such a big deal about 96 early in the war?
So we are the first land battle in the South for our first war in 1775. So it's a pretty big deal. It's also the site where the first patriot South Carolinian died during the war. So two pretty major events.
Wow, no kidding. So to give a little bit of better understanding, can you tell us a little bit more about kind of where the site is located and if there was any kind of special part of 96 National Historic Site that featured largely in this first 1775 battle?
Sure. So 96 is in Greenwood County, South Carolina. For people that may not know South Carolina, we're about an hour from Augusta, a little over an hour from Greenville and Spartanburg, and about 2.5 hours from Charlotte,
So
maybe
would you say kind
some.
of roughly kind of southwest part of South Carolina? Pretty fair?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I guess so. Being a triangle is kind of hard to to have directions sometimes.
Right, right.
Yeah, but yeah, I'd say that's fair. Definitely surrounded by a lot of national forest. So if you're looking at maps with forest in them, if you see a big green splotch kind of going towards the Georgia area, we're somewhere in there.
Nice. So now I know there's layers of history there with 96 National Historic Site. Is there any certain part of the park or any things that can be seen that goes back to the 1775 clash?
So we do have a stockade fort where the first battle took place. However, the reconstructed fort that's there doesn't look like the 1775 battle fort. It looks more like what the fort that was there in 1781 probably looked like. It's much nicer construction than the 1775 fort.
And I'm sure we'll get into some explanation of how it looked later, but just for
Yeah.
our listeners, a basic explanation, what is a stockade fort?
So stockade is basically taking tree trunks, and sharpening one end and sticking it into the ground, basically making a pretty solid wall around a structure.
Okay, so like a solid wall of upright beams or posts or
Right.
tree trunks or something. Okay.
Yeah.
Now we're talking about where it happened. We're talking about where the site is. When did it happen? We've mentioned 1775, but when does that first battle take place?
So it actually takes place in November. It's November 19th through the 21st when the battle itself is first happening. But, we'll get into this a little bit more, but there's a lot that kind of leads up to it, to understand the 3-day battle and why it happened.
Yeah, I mean, by all means, let's dive into this. Is the best
Okay.
place to start talking about the 3-day battle itself, or do we need to start out with kind of key players, or are there other kind of big moments or movements that kind of make this battle happen?
So I'm kind of thinking we might do a little bit of mix of all three. Um,
Absolutely, take it away.
First, I do want to address, because I know people are going to have questions about why it's called 96. Not going to
Ah,
go into too much detail, um, but I will say, while we do not know for sure, it does show up on the map in 1730 when surveyor George Hunter is coming through and mapping the trail to the Cherokee. And it is believed, or at least the most accepted theory, is that they thought it was 96 miles from the closest Cherokee town, which was Kiowa. So just trying to get that little thing that'll nag at people out of the way.
And the name stuck ever since. Now, there is still a
Yeah,
town of 96, South Carolina, correct?
there is. Yep, we're 2 miles outside of town. So now that we've got that out of the way, I figured I would start maybe a little bit with the raising of the militia. Because when the rebels first start deciding to break away from England, all of the militia that are, currently in existence answer to the crown and to the royal government. And so that's not normally a good idea to have those men fighting for you. And by this point, all of those participants of the standing militias, they have different political thoughts and values, and so you're going to have probably fighting within the ranks. So the provincial Congress in South Carolina does decide to create 3 regiments of militia. 2 of those will be in the coastal area, and then there's a mounted infantry in the backcountry. And so it's primarily this mounted infantry that is going to be taking part in the battle here in November of 1775. There are a few happenings, before the first battle here. There are acts of war that are happening, but there's no bloodshed happening yet. Fort Charlotte is a pretty well-known one. For that's about 30 miles from 96 to the southwest. On the
Savannah River.
Fort Charlotte was in McCormick County, what's today McCormick County. So on July 12th, Major James Mason of that new mounted ranger group leads a group of his men to Fort Charlotte, and they're commanded to take the gunpowder and the ammunition and the artillery and anything else that might be useful that's stored in that fort. That fort had been built during the, I believe, French and Indian War, and was still in existence and was used primarily for storing, ammunition and artillery and weapons for any future events. So Mason does that. He leaves as Captain James Caldwell, which every time I read that name, I think of you, Will.
Yeah, no relation, no relation.
But he leaves James Caldwell in charge of Fort Charlotte and heads to 96. Now, when they took Fort Charlotte, there was no bloodshed. It had been occupied by men loyal to the crown, but they didn't want to fight. They were outnumbered, and so they just said, "Here you go, take it." So that is the first kind of instance of hostilities and war in South Carolina, at least in the backcountry. But like I said, there's no bloodshed, so it a lot of times kind of gets overlooked.
Right.
But it does kind of kick things off in the backcountry. And that this is actually a point where you start seeing men switching sides already. The battles haven't even started, and people are already switching sides. Captain Moses Kirkland originally was part of James Mason's ranger group, but he actually does change sides after they leave Fort Charlotte and start heading to 96. He abandons them and starts rounding up loyalists saying, "Hey, you need to take back this powder, this ammunition. You need to, stand up and take it back and arrest him and keep them from trying to take over the backcountry."
Interesting.
I've read some instances of why Kirkland changes sides so early, and one of the most interesting ones I read was that he was jealous that Mason had been put in command. So I don't know if that's true, but it is one of the theories that I've
I was
read.
about to ask if we had any idea why Kirkland did that, because when you look in some other reports from early in the war in the South, he is a very notable loyalist
Yeah,
leader, even visiting with British High Command, potentially being one of the big architects of the Southern strategy the British later adopt. So that's really
right.
interesting that he is one of those very early, probably very notable examples of how people, for one reason or another, their view of the war and what is proper to be doing in this turmoil, they shift and they change.
Yeah, and sometimes we don't know for sure why that is. Sometimes we do, but, like we said, other times we can guess, but
Right.
we're not them.
And even if we have like a written document, how much are they going to put their honest
Right.
motivations into the written
Yeah.
document? You almost need to get a time machine and go sit down with a cup of coffee and get the real story behind it.
Right, right.
But so we're looking at this happening in July. We still got a
Yeah.
quite a ways to go before the November 19th fight. So what's kind of your,
Yeah.
your next big milestone?
So Kirkland abandons Mason, and when Mason arrives at 96, he is arrested, and he's put in jail for all of the rest of the day. So not a very long time, and then he's released. The next big thing that happens is actually at the end of July, and what you get is the Council of Safety sending 3 men from Charleston into the backcountry to try to convince the people in the backcountry, especially those that are on the fence or siding with the crown, to join their cause, to join the rebellion, join the patriot cause. These 3 men are William Henry Drayton. So if anybody's been to Charleston, you probably recognize that name. Reverend William Tennant and Reverend Oliver Hart. Hart doesn't do a whole lot of traveling. He kind of does it for a little bit and then is out of there. But Tennant and Drayton do a lot of traveling. They travel sometimes together, they travel sometimes separate, and both of them do end up in the 96 area. Tennant actually keeps a journal, so we do have at least part of his journal that his son transcribed. I always think it's kind of funny reading his journal because he'll talk about how he'll say harangued people for 2 hours after he gave them a sermon and how they're so ready to sign. And I'm always thinking, are they really ready to sign, or are they just so tired of listening to you talk that they're like, I will just sign anything to get you to be quiet.
The best interrogation possible. Just put whatever paper you have in front of me. I'll sign it. Let me go. Dismiss
Right,
us.
right. So it is funny reading his journals just because of that. But when they're doing their travel from late July into September. So that's a good long travel. But when they're doing that, they do come to the area. It's actually on the other side of the Saluda River from us, but the area between the Saluda and the Broad River where it forks. And there they meet a lot of the loyalist captains for the militias, and the leaders, including Colonel Fletchell, Lieutenant Colonel Kirkland. So again, he's still siding with the crown at this point.
Got his promotion, it looks like,
Majors,
too.
yeah, yeah. Hey, promotions are a good driver, right? Majors Joseph Robinson and Jeremiah Terry, and Captains Robert and Patrick Cunningham. They do not, according to Tennant, they don't have a lot of luck swaying the people in that area of South Carolina. But when they visit 96, according to Tennant, I'm going to quote him here. Mr. Drayton harangued them and was followed by me. The audience appealed fully convinced. Again, I'm questioning how
The the
convinced they actually are.
the legitimacy of that claim. They appeared
Yeah.
convinced. They were also maybe asleep. But
Yeah, they may have been like, glassy eyed.
now I want to
But
go back to
anyway,
something you said earlier real quick.
yeah.
We were talking about 96 and they're going to 96 and it comes from a name from a trading post. He said somebody was put in jail at 96. Can we talk a little bit real quick about
Yeah.
what was 96? Like why are they going there? There's a jail there. That's a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
So before we get
Yes.
into the fortification and we talked about the stockade, but like what is 96?
So 96 is a colonial backcountry town. At this point, there's approximately 12 houses and businesses. Now, I'm sure a lot of businesses were taking place out of people's houses at that point, probably. But there's also a jail in a town because back in the 1760s, there had been the regulator movement in South Carolina, And as a result of the regulator movement, it was decided that the colony needed to be split into 7 judicial districts. 96 was the farthest west district. So you've got the District of 96, which is a huge area, but the town of 96 is actually made the district seat. And so because it's the district seat, it receives a jail and a courthouse. So it's kind of it sounds like a very small town to us today, but in the context of the day, it's a big deal. It's pretty impressive, especially for the backcountry.
I was about to say, when people hear, "Oh, there were 12 houses and it's a town," like,
Yeah.
geez, come on, like,
Well, the
but we
great thing is that Charlotte, North Carolina was about the same size.
perfect. So they put it in some context. When you're looking at the backcountry in the Carolinas, people are here because they want farms, they want space,
Yeah.
they want land. They don't want to be in a town. So to have, like you said, same level as Charlotte at this time, a
Yeah.
dozen or so houses together, it's enough to be made the judicial seat and a jail constructed. That's a very big deal. So you're looking at the kind of center of power for Western South
Mhm.
Carolina. This
Yep.
largest district is here. Okay, so that makes a lot of sense. Why there's
Yeah.
a jail, why they're meeting there,
Yep.
why you're able to gather a crowd. It's going to the big time when you go to 96.
It
Okay.
is. Yeah.
Now you mentioned
Um
some names earlier too, and this may be worked in later, but can you tell us a little bit more about who the Cunningham brothers were, the Robert and
Yeah,
Patrick?
so the two Cunningham brothers will play a big part in why this battle happens. But they are originally immigrated, the family immigrated to Virginia in 1681. So by this point, they've been here in the colonies almost 100 years. And then in 1769, Robert and Patrick, who are brothers, moved to South Carolina. Robert settled at the Island Ford on the Saluda River, which is the Island Ford Road is one of the roads that goes through 96, so not too far from 96 where he settled. And Robert and his brother Patrick were both pretty significant men and well-known men and leaders in the backcountry. Robert was one of the first magistrates for the district, so that's a pretty big deal. And then Patrick was a deputy surveyor, and they both were, no, we're supporting the crown. We don't agree with breaking off from them. So they're pretty adamant on that. They do not change.
Well, do you think this is partly to do with their positions? I mean, these guys seem to
Yeah,
be up and comers. They are coming
yeah,
down in the 1760s to this new place to be. You've got political appointments, you've got magistrates and deputy surveyors, important people in the community. And compared to, hey, there's this new rebellion going where we're going to throw off this system. It's like, well, we kind
right.
of like the system. It's going pretty well for us.
Right? Why would we go against the system that's working for us?
And do you think this kind of applies to a lot of your people out here in the district? Like why Drayton and Tennant are not having so much success at times?
I
Because
think
you have
that's
people who
part
are,
of it.
yeah, they're pro system.
As part of it, the other part of it is that during the regulator movement, I think a lot of tension between the low country and the backcountry happened because the backcountry blamed a lot of the problems that they had back here, being the Wild West, basically, on the people in the low country. And there's still kind of that tension that's going on. So
Now,
it's
I do
kind
want
of
to
a
clarify.
combination of things.
I want to clarify for our listeners though, that when we're talking about the regulators, this is not the North Carolina regulator movement.
No,
These
it's like
are
the
this is
opposite.
very different. Yeah, this is pro government involvement. They want
Yeah,
government attention. They want law and order, like you're talking about. If people want to read more about the situation in the backcountry prior to the revolution and understanding
yeah,
the settlement and the regulators, Wood Mason's journal, as he's traveling through from Charleston, talks a lot about how horrible it is and the need for law. And he becomes persuaded that, yes, it is the lack of attention from the low country, from the coastal government, that's
yeah,
caused such a bad backcountry situation. So, like you were saying, a lot of tensions between backcountry and low country. Um, Anyway, so we've got these low country guys, Drayton and Tennant. They've been touring around. They're at 96. They're making their peels. They're haranguing the masses. Sometimes successful, sometimes not. What's going to
right.
hit the fan next?
So they finally Tenet starts kind of returning to Charleston in September. But Drayton stays a little bit longer, and he finally decides, these people are not listening to me. They're not agreeing with me, at least not enough of them. So he decides to take over 96, and he actually decides he's going to arrest the men that oppose him, especially the leaders. So on September 6th, with about 120 militia and 4 swivel guns, he heads back to 96, arriving on September 8th, and he dispatches men to seize specifically Robert Cunningham. Cunningham, however, knows that they're coming, and so he is able to escape. And then on September 10th, Drayton learns that loyalists under the command of Fletchel are getting ready to head out to 96 to, combat him. That actually ends up being a false rumor. Drayton gets prepared for it, sends men out to try to ambush that supposed army, but it does end up to be a false rumor that they are not actually coming. However, they are those loyalists, those men supporting the crown are about 10 miles away from 96, and they are under the command of both Fletchel and Cunningham. But actually both Cunninghams. So at this point, their kind of tensions are getting high. And so Drayton decides, well, maybe we just need to talk this all out. So he eventually decides, you know what I'll do? I will draft up a declaration. I'll have it read to everybody back here. And the commanders that are supporting the crown, they can sign it and we'll all be good. So he does this. And unfortunately, Fletchel signs it, but the Cunninghams do not. They do not agree to it, and so no, we're not signing it. We're not going to abide by it. Supposed treaty. Drayton, however, thinks that because Fletchel signed it, everybody will follow him. Really, what he ends up doing with this is kind of dividing the supporters of the crown even more. So you've got two factions. You've got the ones that, yeah, we'll try to abide by this treaty, and then the ones that are like, no, that's not a treaty we want to follow. It's not honorable. And Robert Cunningham is the main leader for this faction this is not an honorable treaty. In fact, he actually, when Drayton writes him asking if he intends to follow the treaty, Cunningham writes back, I must confess, I do not hold with that peace, at the same time as fond of peace as any man, but upon honorable terms. I love he's like digging into Drayton there. Calling him not honorable. But according to my principles, that peace is false and disgraceful from beginning to end. It appears to me, sir, you had all the bargain making to yourself, and if that was the case, I expected you would have acted with more honor than taken the advantage of men half scared out of their senses at the sight of liberty caps and sound of cannon, as seeing and hearing has generally more influence on some men than reason. So I
Mm.
think that's a great little nugget on how Robert Cunningham is viewing, Drayton's demands.
Well, so not
And
even on
that,
Drayton, but you're looking at his perception of those who do sign it. That little dig in there,
yeah,
it's like, well, these are the guys that they were just easily intimidated by your armed
yeah,
men, those 4 swivel guns you mentioned, those small cannon he's bringing with him.
yeah,
These guys are just kind of almost like calling them cowards or something, that they're not even
yeah,
going to stand up and fight for their principle. They're just going to get bullied by
yeah.
Drayton. So he's throwing barbs left and right.
He is. He is. And that letter really kind of sends almost a shiver down the Council of Safety and Drayton's spines. Because they're like, ooh, this guy could be problems. He could cause a lot of problems for us in the future. And because or because Cunningham refuses to sign this agreement, the Council of Safety finally truly calls for his arrest on October 23rd. Or no, they call for his arrest before that. But on October 23rd, Captain John Caldwell files an affidavit at the 96 courthouse and charges Robert Cunningham with seditious remarks, which
Well,
is a
yeah,
pretty big deal. Yeah, yeah, I know, right?
the way
Um,
to put it.
Although they're seditious remarks for the rebellious government, not the maybe government that may at that point have the rightful claim.
And that's kind of one of the best parts about this story about 1775 and this upcoming battle is both sides view themselves as the legitimate legal government. You've got
Yeah,
the men saying, "No, we listen to the royal governor and his council." And then the committee of safety, the council of safety saying, "No, it's the provincial assembly, it's the
right.
Congress." So they're both trying to really get as much, I don't know if you want to say put a bow on it, but enough
Yeah,
legal set dressing to give their claims legitimacy.
yeah. So after that affidavit is filed, Andrew Williamson actually does arrest Robert Cunningham. And Cunningham is then sent to Charleston where he's placed in jail. So he's taken, you know, there's a jail in 96, but he's taken all the way to Charleston, which is a 6-day horseback ride, placed in jail there. When he has his hearing, he actually does acknowledge that he opposes the terms of the treaty. No surprise, he wrote that, but he disagrees and disputes that he is citing a rebellion. However, his arguments pretty much fall on deaf ears, and he's charged with high crimes, and he is placed in jail for an indefinite sentence. And that indefinite sentence does not sit well with a lot of backcountry residents.
So you've seen the Patriots are slowly taking power either through convincing an argument or arresting key leaders. You've seen a split in the loyalist faction between those who are willing to maybe find some kind of neutral terms, some kind of peace with the rebels, and then those who are saying, no, this is ridiculous, we're drawing a line. Now the drawing a line leader, one of the big names, Robert Cunningham, has been
Yep.
arrested. It's just making other people angrier. Do we know if his arrest, you said it impacted the backcountry loyalists a lot, do we know if this persuaded any of those who were in favor of a peace and neutrality, if it persuaded them to get more militant, more extremist because
Yeah,
of the treatment of Robert Cunningham?
it did. And actually, it had the opposite effect in some ways than the Council of Safety would have hoped, because a lot, Tennant and Drayton have been traveling through the backcountry saying these are the reasons that we need to split up from the king. Yeah, we're not getting fair trials. We're not getting sentences that are fair. And then they see this happen and they're like, wait, he has an indefinite sentence. He's not told how long he's going to be in jail.
In
How's that any
Charleston.
different?
Yeah,
Yeah,
in
how's that
Charleston, when
any
we have a
different from what
courthouse
y'all
right
are
here,
complaining about?
flag on the
So,
play, definitely.
yeah, so that actually there's some instances where it sways some of those men that may have actually, been, no, I think I kind of agree with these rebels, these patriots. But they see that and they're like, what are you talking about? You're acting exactly the same. So it doesn't work to the way that they thought it would.
So not only do you see it kind of aggravating some of the more neutral loyalists, but it's also tempering some of the resolve of the backcountry patriots, is what you're saying,
Yeah,
because now they see these big ideals that they supported, they don't see them in practice. They kind of see the opposite.
yeah,
Um,
exactly.
so what's going to happen next?
So next, imagine this. His brother Patrick is very unhappy. And so his brother Patrick gathers a group of men and they start heading to Charleston with the intent of freeing his brother. They don't actually ever make it to Charleston. When they are not too far from 96, they come across a supply wagon. And this supply wagon, if you go back to when Drayton was visiting the backcountry, after he came up with his little treaty of 96 and he heads back to Charleston, he actually stops at the Congaree. It's near Columbia today. But he stops at the Congaree and he meets some Cherokee leaders, and to convince them to at least stay neutral while the coming disagreements, battles are happening, he tells them that the provincial Congress will be glad to send them supplies, especially trade goods. So this wagon is the result of that agreement between Trayton and the Cherokee. However, Patrick Cunningham comes across it with his men and says, look, they've got all this gunpowder and lead that they're sending to the Cherokee. So they capture it. It never makes it to the Cherokee. And he starts spreading a rumor that that shipment was to be used for a loyalist massacre. Doesn't matter, that's not actually what it was supposed to be used for. Rumors are rumors, and they are very prevalent. And so that starts turning even more people in the backcountry to the loyalist side. The wagon driver, he does escape, and he reports to the patriot leaders in the backcountry and tells them what happens. And so Major Andrew Williamson, the man who had arrested Robert Cunningham, starts mustering his militia. He is, for about 2 weeks, camped at the Long Canes, waiting for his militia to increase so that they can go and take back this shipment. His military or militia group finally grows to about 560, somewhere in that range. However, at the same time, people under Cunningham are joining him, and the Tory group grows to about 1900. So
Ooh.
the the Patriot group is way outnumbered.
I mean, so you see lots of reasons, though. You're seeing the
Yeah,
increasing can't think of the word, militantism of the
sure.
backcountry loyalists with the arrest and the treatment of Robert Cunningham. You're seeing some of the patriots possibly persuaded back into the loyalist side by the
Mhm.
actions of the Committee of Safety. And now, like you said, the power of a good story, the power of this
Yeah.
rumor that this ammunition shipment was from the Patriots to the Cherokee Nation to try and form an alliance and attack the backcountry loyalists. There's few things more powerful than fear. So you're
Yeah.
going to see a lot of people saying, well, this is obviously not the side we want to support. And so, yeah, you're looking at, they said 1,900 loyalists in the
About
area,
1900.
and now only
Mhm.
about 500 patriots under Williamson.
And a
Does
lot
he,
of those patriots are from out of the state. They're from Georgia and North Carolina.
so do you see that also? Does anyone write about an increasing amount of loyalists stepping up and taking up arms because of the outsider patriots coming in, saying almost like feeling that they're invaded?
I don't know that I've seen any documentation of that. Um, yeah, I've not seen anything, not to say it's not out there. And it's definitely a possibility.
Right. Because I know the border's pretty fluid at this time.
Yeah,
People are always moving. Even when we see later in the revolution, groups will go back and forth and fight because it's kind of viewed as
right.
their local community if it's near the border, even if it is like
Yeah.
across the river. Um,
Well, and Augusta's right there. That's, right on the border, so
Right, Augusta,
it's
Georgia, there on the
yeah.
river. So does Williamson, what's he gonna do now? He is horribly
Yeah.
outnumbered.
He
And
is
also
horribly
the
outnumbered.
loyalists, well, the loyalists have also captured this shipment of ammunition, so they're more numerous and armed. How
Yeah.
is he gonna pursue this? Is he gonna try and
Yeah.
actually find this ammunition, or is he gonna have to change plans?
So Williamson wanted to, march over to the our loyalists and attack them. But because he's so outnumbered, he actually has a council of war, and the council of war convinces him that instead they need to take the defensive instead of the offensive. So they decide they're going to go to 96. So on November 18th, they leave Long Canes and start heading to 96. They arrive at 96 on November 19th, about dawn, so early in the morning. and they choose an area to start building a fort. And the area they choose is across from the spring branch from the town to the west. And they choose this area because there's a farm that has some outbuildings. And since it's a farm, it's relatively clear. There's not a lot of cover and it's at a high point. So, you want the high ground. So they start building a fortification around the outbuildings that are there. They're actually using the outbuildings as part of the fortification. And so this is where we describe this lovely fort. It is made from the outbuildings, old fence rails, cow hides, and baled hay.
Okay.
Literally
Um,
whatever they can get their hands on.
old fence rails, cow hides, and some gathered up hay is what they're
Yeah.
gonna use to stop bullets.
Yes. Yep. Like I said,
Okay.
it's a really pretty fort, right?
And I guess the part of the idea here is yes, you can, have some good cover with the buildings, with the fence rails,
Mhm.
but then I'm not sure how sturdy those cow hides would be. So more of a concealment thing, just trying to hide your
Yeah,
numbers and your movements.
that's what I'm thinking. Cause yeah, cowhide's not gonna stop a bullet. Not unless you put it, I guess, over a hay belt. I don't know. But
Sounds like some ballistic
that's what
testing
they
we need to do.
reported building the fort out of. The Patriots did also have a few swivel guns. So they mounted those swivel guns. So swivel gun is basically, I like to refer to them as baby cannons. Um,
Baby cannons.
Baby cannons. They're very cute. But whereas a cannon has a set carriage that it travels on, you can actually lift the barrel of a swivel gun up and it's got a yoke that it sits on, and you can find a tree stump, hollow out a section of the tree stump, and plop the gun down in there. And because it's on a yoke, you can swivel it around. Typically, you're looking at between a half a pound shot to maybe up to a 2-pound shot. So not very big.
And if people need to get more of a visual reference to this, you can see these in a lot of pirate movies, correct?
Yeah, yeah, they do end up a lot on ships. But they're used pretty readily in the backcountry from the French and Indian War and probably before as well through the Revolution.
So you're talking about a very mobile weapon, a very
Yeah,
significant weapon if you're comparing this to your average hunting rifle.
yeah.
All right, so he's in this makeshift fort, Williamson, 500
Yep,
Patriots. He's got some little baby cannons hiding behind a
yep.
cowhide. What's
Yep,
going to happen
some,
next?
rifles and muskets, whatever the men have with them. He's got some cows for food, but the loyalist troops under Robinson and Cunningham arrive the same day, so the 19th, at about 11 o'clock in the morning. So Williamson's really only had what, 3, maybe 4 hours
Not long,
to
yeah.
build a fort. Yeah, not long at all. The loyalists kind of make a fanfare out of it. They approach with drums and banners. So sounds a lot more exciting. But they occupy the village, the courthouse, and the jail. Um, got a lot more people. Probably need a lot more space.
And in this area, you described it as it is to the east of this fortified hilltop. It's down and across the creek, the Spring Branch
Yeah.
Creek, up on the
Mm-hmm.
next high ground. So they're definitely
Yeah.
within sight. They're
Oh yeah.
watching this big loyalist army make a big show of it. Um, when do we start shooting?
So we start shooting actually this day. But first, the two sides do try to come to agreements before shots are fired. But while the commanders are talking it out kind of halfway between, some of the patriots are seized. They had two of them at least had come out of the fort. We don't really know why. Don't know if it was, I wonder what's going on, nosiness, or what it was that caused them to leave the fort before any treaty had been agreed to. But they came out of the fort and the loyalists seized them. When that happened, Andrew Williamson commanded the Patriots to, save his men, and this ends up actually causing the first shots to be fired. So the first shots are fired because two men wanted to potentially see what was happening.
Just because some
Um,
goobers wanted to be looky-loos, you got
yep,
shooting, and the revolution has begun.
exactly.
My goodness.
So, yep. So the shooting continues until about 5:30 in the afternoon, which, it's November, so it's probably starting to get dark. It's hard to see. There's kind of sporadic shooting throughout the night, but nothing constant. And then on November 20th, the following day, the shooting resumes when sun comes back up. And this day, the loyalists actually attempt to burn the Whigs out of the fort. They try several things. First, they try to set the field on fire to create a smoke screen and kind of, hoping it will burn toward the fort, but it doesn't. It fails. And then the other thing they try is to create a shield of sticks and branches, a giant shield that they can push forward with so that they can get closer to the fort. And they're hoping that using that, they'll be able to get right up on the fort and set it on fire. But instead, they actually catch their shield on fire. So
Hmm.
maybe they just need to stop trying to use fire.
That's 0 for 2 with the fire approach. Yeah.
I know. Yeah. So, the fighting continues through the 20th. Again, when it gets dark, it slacks off. And then on the 21st, it resumes in the morning. At this point, Williamson is running out of water. And so his men start digging a well. And they dig about 40 feet before they hit water. But they've got water now. Unknown to a lot of his men, they are also running out of ammunition and gunpowder. So Williamson's kind of not wanting to tell them. He doesn't want to cause them to abandon hope. So he keeps that to himself that they're running out of powder. He wrote later on that we had not above 30 pounds of powder, except what little the men had in their horns. Finally, at around dusk, the loyalists wave a flag from the jail window, signaling that they want to parley. And so the two sides send out men. They come to an agreement that the next morning they'll meet up and figure out what the peace agreement is going to be, if there will be a peace agreement. So finally, on the November 22nd in the morning, the commanders of both sides meet. They actually meet at a house in the town, and they're almost ready to sign the peace agreement when they're surrounded by a couple hundred loyalists who are demanding that that the Patriots hand over those swivel guns that they had had. So the commanders kind of both say, yeah, we'll add that into the agreement, but there's this kind of a secret agreement between them that after 3 days they'll hand those swivel guns back over.
Mm.
So it's kind of a who wins this battle. Neither side, I would say.
Right, because you're looking at there with the swivel gun surrender. You have, well, on both sides, you kind of have leaders who have a
Yeah.
bigger understanding of what's going on and the impacts. Williamson realizes he cannot keep fighting. He can't hold on much
Hmm.
longer. You have the loyalists, they just want peace. Even if it means
Yeah.
leaving these four baby cannon in the hands of the rebels, we're gonna stop this. We're going to have peace again. And but
Yeah.
then the men with their tempers, they're like, no, we want this, we want to win. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
what can we do to meet in the middle? How can we give these
Right.
guys that sense of victory, but still make it palatable to both and just get back to peace?
Right. Just go home. And it's not known for sure why the loyalists signaled they wanted to parlay. I mean, as far as we know, they're not running out of ammunition. You know, they're not stuck in a fort. They've got water. As far as we know, they've got food. But it is thought that they knew that there were reinforcements under Charles Stoney and Richard Richardson coming up to help Williamson out.
Also,
And
Patriot reinforcements.
yeah, a bunch of
Mm.
them coming up from the Low Country. So, it's thought that that knowledge may have kind of, hey, let's just get this done with before they get here.
Right. Now, do you think if Williamson had known, do you know if Williamson knew about Richardson's approach? Do you
I
think that would
do
have given him a
not.
resolve to hold out longer?
I do not. But I do think being so low on ammunition, he's probably like, okay, yes, let's let's get this done. But at the same time, we're saving face. We're not the ones asking for parlay.
Ah, good point. Good point. He's like, yeah, well, we'll keep going till, you know, till it's settled. And he's secretly like, oh, thank God.
Yeah,
Um, we're done with this.
that's what I think personally.
Interesting. Now, you mentioned that this was the first battle in South Carolina in the Revolution. This is where you have the first South Carolina patriot killed. What do we know about
Yeah.
that man, or do we know like what day or how this happened during the fight?
So he was shot through the head. I believe think it was actually the first day that he was shot. I could have that wrong, but his name was James Birmingham. We don't know a whole lot about him. He was, more of like a private, but he did leave behind a widow and several children. And so, in the later years, his family is given land and some money because of his death.
So we have James Birmingham falling killed. What other
Mhm.
casualties are we seeing on both sides after this 3 day
Yeah.
shootout?
So the Patriots had James Birmingham was the only one killed. They had 12 wounded. For the Loyalist, you get conflicting information depending on who's writing. So the Loyalists claim that they have one dead, Captain Looper, and that they have I think they said they had 12 dead, kind of the same number. But other sources, some like Mason wrote, "We have only one man dead since this battle and 11 wounded. The enemy say they had but one man dead, who is a Captain Looper, and about the same number wounded as ours. By the best information, they have buried at least 27 men and have many wounded." So we we don't really truly know what the number for the loyalist was.
Well, and so you kind of wonder when you talk about the scarcity of ammunition. Williamson is running out. The Patrick Cunningham group seizing that gunpowder store. 3 days, maybe they were firing away. Maybe looking at the casualty numbers, it was more of a slower rate of fire, trying to aim
Yeah.
shots and conserve ammunition. And talking about
Maybe
a
also, like, we're all neighbors. We might not agree, but do we really want to kill each other?
that's something else to consider is you're looking very early. This is the first shots in anger in South Carolina during the
Yeah.
war. You don't have a lot of that brutal personal feud that will kind of exemplify the revolution here in the South in later years. Maybe the Patriots saw the loyalists working on different things out in the surrounding tree line, the surrounding community, and they're saying,
Yeah.
"Oh, they're just trying to save face." When really we got them better than they are going to admit,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff.
You
Kind of,
know, a lot of these are like the one I just read is Mason, like a week later, writing a letter to the Congress telling what happened. So, you know, is it trying to make himself and his troops look better?
yeah, because nobody ever has a political agenda in official reports or anything.
No.
Um, so when we're looking at this 3 days, they finally come to a truce agreement in the town of 96. What do they do to kind of to wrap us up today? What's going to be kind of the fallout from this? Are there any kind of ripples that are unexpected?
Yeah. So part of the agreement was, other than this handing over the swivel guns, part of the agreement is that both sides will basically go home and the other side will not harass them. And there's actually a section in there that says any reinforcements that are on their way are to be held to this agreement. I think that's probably put in there for Richardson's men. However, when Richardson gets up here, he decides that that does not apply to him. And so he completely ignores the peace treaty. And he starts rounding up and chasing and arresting all the loyalist leaders that he can find. And you actually get the snow campaign, which I think we should probably talk about in another episode. Um,
For sure.
but this, yeah, I mean, it basically though leads to the majority of your loyalist leaders leaving South Carolina, and a lot of them going to northern Florida.
Okay. So you're looking at everyone's agreeing, bygones are bygones. Let's call it a truce and head home. And then here's someone saying, surprise! And now
Yeah,
everybody's under arrest. Probably not a lot of good faith shared by the loyalists at seeing this happen. They thought they could
yeah,
negotiate. They thought they could come to terms. And here's a patriot leader saying, "No, I'm not going to follow your rules." So I can
yep,
see where that would really undermine some relationships later on. But Adrian, thank you so much for talking to us about this first battle, the Battle of
yeah.
96, November 19th through 21st, 1775. Are there any kind of recommended readings, recommended places for folks to go and learn more about this event?
Yeah, so there's actually several books that you can find a little bit more information on this battle in. There's the South Carolina and the American Revolution, a battlefield history. It does actually cover really quickly the battle. There's March to Independence, the American Revolution in the Southern Colonies, 1775 to 1776. I kind of like how that one's set up because it goes through the seasons. And in each season, it divides up the colonies, the Southern colonies. There's always the Snow Campaign, first land battle of the American Revolution in the South Carolina. It primarily, of course, talks about the Snow Campaign, but because the battle here is, leading up to the Snow Campaign, is kind of the kickoff to the Snow Campaign, there's a good bit of information in that book as well. And then, of course, there's always primary sources if you can get them. But that's getting easier, especially with digitalizing stuff.
Right, for sure. Well, again, thank you so much. I think this is
Yeah.
really important to our understanding of the rest of our series here, talking about the Southern theater of the American Revolution. You've got to start with the first battle in the Southern theater of the Revolution. So, to learn more about the American Revolution and our home national park sites, check out www.nps.gov/NISI for Ranger Adrian and 96 National Historic Site, like you've just heard about, and www.nps.gov/OVVI for me, Ranger William, and the Overmountain Victory National Historic Trail. But that's going to conclude this episode of Southern War, a podcast about the Southern theater of the American Revolution. So thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed, and we'll see y'all next time when we revisit the Southern theater of the American Revolution.
Bye.